Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 201 Cuba Island. Mao Mei is so important that Marin has already sent people to the Strait of Gibraltar to meet her. Even if the trafficking of Mao Mei is known to others, it doesn't matter. However, the impact is still not good. After all, according to the teachings of Catholicism, everyone is equal. Therefore, the slave trade cannot be made public. Although indentured servants are also very popular in Europe, they cannot be made public. Portugal is trafficking in black slaves, but it is not public. All of this involves religious issues. Fortunately, the female slaves sold by Marin are all Orthodox Christians, who are hostile to Catholicism. If Marin dared to sell Catholics as slaves in large numbers, the Vatican would probably have to explode. Even if he has a pope as a father-in-law, he would probably have to suffer. As for the trafficking of Orthodox women, it is okay as long as it is not discovered publicly. If the news is made public, it will also affect Marin's reputation. After all, the large-scale trafficking of women and children will inevitably lead to the notoriety of a human trafficker. To this end, Marin asked Kohler to arrange personnel to be stationed in the Strait of Gibraltar and bribe Pizas, the commander of the Spanish Gibraltar fleet, to turn a blind eye. When he arrived in the Atlantic Ocean, in order to ensure the safety of Mao Mei, Marin also arranged 20 warships to come to meet and avoid problems with Mao Mei's safety. After all, these women are the hope of those bachelor immigrants in the East Frisian state. It's no pity to lose the goods, but it's a pity to lose people. In particular, the entire fleet is full of beauties. When the fleet transporting Mao Mei passed the Strait of Gibraltar and joined the escort fleet in the Atlantic Ocean, Columbus's fleet also came to the Caribbean Sea again. After passing the Cape of Haitien on the island of Hispaniola that had been discovered, Columbus discovered that the Christmas Fortress, a colony that he had once established, had been abandoned by the Spaniards. Then, Columbus continued to go west along the waters north of Haiti Island to find the island of Cuba. In fact, when Columbus first discovered America, he had already discovered the island of Cuba. However, what Columbus discovered at that time was only a section of the southeastern end of the narrow island of Cuba. Moreover, after the second voyage, due to the influence of Marin's syphilis report, Columbus was dethroned and became a street rat that everyone wanted to beat, so there was no third and fourth voyages. Therefore, Columbus's information about Cuba was very incomplete before, and it could only be regarded as a glimpse. There was only information about a section of the southeastern end of Cuba, and there was no complete map at all. However, after arriving at the coast of Cuba, Columbus was extremely surprised to find that the outline map of Cuba given to him by Marin was very accurate. It seemed that someone had discovered Cuba before. So, Columbus no longer had the face to call himself the discoverer of the wild continent. Obviously, everyone had a complete map, which was much more advanced than him. Along the northern coast of Cuba, Columbus directed the fleet to continue sailing while recording the longitude and latitude to facilitate later sailors to easily reach their destination according to the coordinates. After sailing for a few days, the direction of the northern coast of Cuba Island turned from northwest to due west, and then to southwest. Soon, the fleet arrived at the westernmost tip of Cuba Island, and then headed east. At this point, Columbus no longer needed to explore. Because, it turned out that the map of Cuba given by Marin was very accurate, but there were no specific coordinates. After discovering Pinos Island, Columbus simply ended his exploration of Cuba Island. With the outline map of Cuba drawn by Marin according to the maps of later generations, he still explored AP. In fact, his mission this time was clearly to record the navigation coordinates. Having a complete set of navigation coordinates is very suitable for ordinary captains to find specific destinations according to the coordinates so as not to go astray. After replenishing fresh water on Pinos Island, Columbus originally planned to go directly south to find Panama. However, Columbus suddenly remembered that the small ball made of something called rubber that he gave to Caesar before attracted Marin's great attention. Moreover, Marin said that if he could find a rubber tree, it would be a credit. So Columbus stopped going south and returned to Cuba. He used his men who knew simple Indian language to go ashore to communicate with the natives and inquire about the news of rubber trees. The Indians living on Cuba and Hispaniola belonged to the Taino people among the Arawak people. Columbus and several capable men had stayed on the island of Haiti for a long time and learned some Taino language from the local Taino people. Therefore, it was not particularly difficult for them to communicate with the locals. The Taino people were gentle by nature, not as brave and aggressive as the Caribbean people. Therefore, Columbus and his men easily communicated with the locals. After sending some beautiful glass ornaments, the local chief told Columbus that the seeds of the rubber tree were actually brought from the Caribbean people who invaded from the south. There are not many rubber trees in Cuba. The chief searched and searched, but only found dozens of rubber trees in his territory. He collected a small bag, hundreds of seeds, of rubber tree seeds and told Columbus the precautions and methods of tapping rubber. Columbus collected hundreds of rubber tree seeds as if they were treasures, and planned to take them to Granada on his return voyage, and let George arrange for them to be planted. A few years later, there were hundreds of rubber trees that could be used for rubber tapping. After leaving the Taino tribe, Columbus rushed to the next Taino tribe, and used the same method to get some beautiful glass ornaments and exchanged dozens of rubber tree seeds from another Taino chief. And so on. After visiting 5 Taino chiefs along the coast, Columbus collected a total of 460 rubber tree seeds, and then carefully packed them in a waterproof animal skin bag and hid them like treasures. Perhaps thinking that so many seeds were enough, Columbus finally ended his activities along the coast of Cuba, commanded the fleet to bypass the western end of Cuba again, and began to head south. During the voyage, Columbus was surprised to find that there were many large Indian canoes sailing in the Caribbean Sea on the vast ocean. It seems that these canoes lost the land to the west, Mexico, to trade. So, with strong curiosity, Columbus also let the fleet follow the Taino canoe going to the west for trade, arrived at a fishing village on the Yucatan Peninsula, and visited their simple trade fair. The Taino brought island specialties, such as some beautiful shellfish obtained from the seaside or the sea, as well as a large amount of cassava, a kind of fabric called cotton, Mexican long staple cotton, also called island long staple cotton, and some strange gadgets to exchange some necessary supplies with the Maya. On the Yucatan Peninsula, there is an important commodity that the Taino and even the Caribbean people are eager to get, that is, salt. The northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula is the driest area in the Caribbean. It is dry and hot here, and the evaporation is very large. Therefore, some puddles where seawater accumulates after the tide are formed. After the seawater in these puddles is collected, a lot of salt is formed. The Maya can not only collect these natural salts, but also know how to boil salt. The specific method is to use a simple pottery pot, fill it with seawater, and then boil it to obtain salt. The salt trade made the Mayan civilization develop. The Yucatan Peninsula is also an important salt trade center in the Caribbean. Not only the Taino people, but also the Aztecs and the Caribbean people came here to purchase salt. Especially the Taino people on the island of Cuba, which is very close to the Yucatan Peninsula, are more dependent on the salt trade with the Mayans. At the trade fair in the fishing village by the sea, Columbus took out some glittering glass ornaments, which were warmly welcomed by the locals. The locals took out their goods one after another and wanted to exchange them with Columbus. Columbus happily and selectively exchanged some gold sand with the locals and kept it for himself. Then, somehow, he exchanged a piece of cotton cloth. After visiting the Mayan seaside village market, Columbus remembered that he seemed to have some important things to do. So he boarded the ship again and headed south all the way to Panama. Chapter 202, Mao May First Las Vegas. On November 22, after more than 20 days of sailing, the fleet carrying Mao May, under the protection of 20 warships, finally arrived at the port of Emden. Then, Marin went to see Mao May again. Of course, Marin was not stupid this time. He did not directly say that he was going to see a beautiful woman, but told Angela righteously that he was going to the port of Emden to check the work. Angela was familiar with Marin's character at this time. Although he was a little bit wretched, he would not make a big mistake. In fact, if Marin went to see a noble woman, Angela would be really nervous. Because those Mao May were slaves and could not threaten their positions. And those noble girls might threaten their status and even replace themselves. However, after her father ascended the throne as Pope Julius II, Angela no longer thought that she would be replaced by other noble women. As long as Marin did not go crazy, he would definitely not dare to abandon himself. Unless he wanted to try the taste of excommunication. Therefore, Angela didn't say anything about Marin's visit to the hairy girls this time. She just gave a threatening look, and then went to coax her son. When Marin, Khan and other guards rushed to the military-only dock at Emden Port, he had already seen Art organizing a large number of hairy girls to line up for landing. These hairy girls had landed when they passed through Lampedusa Island, and Art organized a bath together, and then each of them was given a white dress. When landing at this moment, Marin saw 2,400 hairy girls in white dresses. Moreover, the quality of this first batch of hairy girls is still very high. Because Art has specially selected them from 20,000 hairy girls. Therefore, these 2,400 hairy girls all have good figures and delicate faces. Some hairy girls have high chests, convex front and back, and extremely tempting figures, which make many perverts visiting on the dock swallow their saliva. Marin swallowed a little saliva, and finally restrained himself. When he saw Khan next to him, he laughed so hard that he couldn't straighten his waist. It turned out that Khan was actually stoned. Khan was extremely embarrassed and asked the guards for a robe to cover up the situation of his little brother, standing up. The other guards were also flushed and dared not laugh. Marin laughed at Khan and said it was okay. Khan was at most embarrassed. But if they dared to laugh at Khan, they would definitely be beaten up, and there was no place to complain. Who let Khan be a humanoid monster, and he was also Marin's confidant. If he was taken away by him, it would be a waste of beating. On the dock, the Mao girls were also passionate and unrestrained. Although they were only wearing a white dress, they were still charming. It was November, and many Mao girls were not afraid of the cold. They dared to show their long legs. Looking at the white and tempting long legs, the beasts on the dock drooled all over the floor. Unfortunately, except for the 5,000 of the 7,000 soldiers in Italy who still had no wives, the others in Marin's army had snatched wives in the war against Denmark. Therefore, the soldiers present are basically married people. And Christianity does not allow marrying too. Otherwise, they would have pounced on it long ago. Of course, in East Frisia, it is not only one woman allowed. For example, Khan was rewarded with 2 Italian women for his military exploits in the attack on Jever. However, this is not common. Before, Marin repeatedly emphasized that only those who have made great military exploits are eligible to reward 2 women. In other words, if you want to take another of these girls home, you must have extraordinary military exploits. In addition, you must also make sure that your husband has no objection. Because the regular soldiers basically have wives, and the 5,000 soldiers far away in Italy cannot come back for the time being. Therefore, in Marin's plan, this group of girls is used to reward the militiamen who accompany the army during the war. These militiamen are basically immigrants, and some are prisoners of war from Saxony. In previous wars, the militiamen actively participated in the transportation of food and supplies to ensure the victory of the war. Even in the early days of conquering the Duchy of Schleswig, many civilians took up weapons and served as defenders in the Duchy of Schleswig for a long time. They were not replaced until the end of the war. Therefore, these Maomei are naturally given priority to those civilians who performed well in the war. So, Marin issued a notice and ordered the managers of the baggage troops to take out the previous war merit statistics book and start to arrange the previous war merits. Then, according to the ranking, the Maomei was distributed. But just when Marin was about to divide up all the 2,400 Maomei, Griffin came from Las Vegas in person. "My lord, you must leave enough beauties for our Las Vegas women's branch. Moreover, we must give priority to selection. The profit of Las Vegas is still very low. In the case that the women's branch is not open, there is really no business relying on casinos and taverns. Although there are regular flights to Hamburg and Cuxhaven to pick up people. However, eating, drinking and having fun are not done in one go, and the business is still not very good. But with Maomei, it's different. The last piece of the puzzle of eating, drinking and having fun is completed, and Las Vegas is complete." I almost forgot about your Las Vegas. How many do you want?" 100, all beauties. Strong and plump, everyone likes this. The ancient Germans did not like weak and frail beauties, but really liked strong and plump beauties with protruding front and back. Well, in fact, modern Europeans and Americans have the same taste, and it has not changed. If the face is more angelic, it will be more perfect. And the beauties that Art selected from the Kaffa prisoner of war camp this time are all of this type. After all, they were selected from 20,000 girls, and none of them were bad. Sure enough, when Griffin took the professional madam to select, he was also dazzled. In the end, the madam picked 100 naturally charming girls, and they were all young women. In the service industry, it is naturally better to have experience. If you choose young girls, it can satisfy the evil demands of some people. However, the most popular ones are those experienced young women. Such women can seduce people, unlike young girls, who are rigid and have few repeat customers. After the first night of the first month, the young girls will quickly fade away, and they are far less attractive than those charming young women. After Griffin picked out 100 naturally charming young women, he happily took them away. Of course, there was also a group of vicious thugs following along the way. And those Maomei who were picked didn't know their tragic fate yet. In this year, although Europe is not as conservative and perverted as the Ming dynasty, a woman who has been engaged in the female branch industry can't think of getting married. Even in the 21st century, women who have worked as female branches generally want to get married, and they will find an honest fool, otherwise they will be finished if their background is seen. Looking at the 100 Maomei who jumped into the fire pit, Marin felt a little reluctant. However, no matter how reluctant he was, he still had to do business. Moreover, Maomei is not a citizen of his own country. It is better to let foreign women engage in special service industries than to let local women engage in such industries. Chapter 203 A good leader who loves his people like his own children. After Griffin left with 100 beautiful girls, the remaining 2,300 girls were naturally distributed to the civilians of the baggage troops under his command. Of course, there are also priorities for how to distribute them. Those civilians who have participated in battles or defended the city will have priority in distribution because of their great contributions. In Marin's army, rewards and punishments are very clear. Before, Marin asked the missionaries who followed the army to record the merits of the soldiers in the army with a large number of books while fooling around. Every reward and punishment is recorded in the book. However, in the record of the merits of the logistics and baggage troops, I didn't think so much before, so the record was a bit vague. After all, the logistics troops are not the main combat troops, there are few combat opportunities, and it is difficult to obtain military merits. Of course, there are still rosters for those who participated in the garrison troops when they were in the Duchy of Schleswig. There are a total of 5,000 civilians stationed in the cities of the Duchy of Schleswig. Although there are not enough 2,300 Maomei this time, Art's fleet will continue to transport Maomei. Therefore, there is no need to worry about not having enough. Only when the 5,000 militiamen who participated in the defense of the city are all allocated Maomei, will it be the turn of other militiamen who participated in the war. And when the militiamen all have wives, it will be the turn of the young men in the colonies. After all, it is really hard and frightening for those young men to cross the ocean to open up a new continent. Moreover, if they marry local Indian women, there is a risk of contracting syphilis. So Marin signed an order colonists are not allowed to marry local people. This is not racial discrimination, but for safety reasons. How terrible is syphilis? In the time and space without Marin's intervention, Europeans did not discover the source of syphilis for many years, nor did they know how syphilis spread. By the time they figured it out, syphilis had completely spread across the European continent, and they couldn't control it. However, the way syphilis spread is relatively simple, that is, through that. A female customer who was infected with syphilis passed it on to a female branch girl. Then, this female branch girl received hundreds of other guests, and syphilis spread rapidly. Then, these hundreds of guests who were infected with syphilis went to other female branches, and other female branches spread it to hundreds of guests, one person spread it to 10, 10 spread it to 100, everyone was infected. Then, the Portuguese went to Macau through the Great Voyage, and by the way, brought syphilis to China. However, for some reason, syphilis in China was just a difficult and complicated disease, which was difficult to treat. However, the mortality rate was not as high as that of Europeans. Maybe it was because the Chinese and Indians were both yellow people, and they had a higher resistance to syphilis. White people had a very low resistance to syphilis, and they would die if they were infected, and their whole body would be ulcerated. In general, syphilis was spread through MLM-style means. The medium of its spread was the female branch girl. Those female customers were all the downline developed by the female branch girls. As long as the MLM den, the women's branch, is taken down, syphilis will lose its medium of transmission. Therefore, under the strong intervention of Marin, Alexander VI completely banned the operation of European women's branches, and finally eliminated syphilis in Europe. Now, Alexander VI is dead and syphilis has been eliminated. In this way, the women's branches in Europe have been lifted, and many women's branches have begun to operate. Marin is taking advantage of this spring breeze to develop the gambling and pornography industries in Las Vegas and take the opportunity to make money. Of course, we can't relax our vigilance just because syphilis is temporarily gone. After all, the source of syphilis in Central America is still there. As long as one day an immigrant or sailor can't control his lower body, it is easy to bring syphilis back again. For this reason, Marin decided to write a letter to the two kings of Spain, asking the two kings to join him in strictly prohibiting immigrants and sailors from having relationships with Indian women. Once discovered, they will be sentenced to 2 years in prison. Those who were infected with syphilis were buried alive and sprinkled with quicklime for disinfection. At the same time, women who would go to America to work in the service industry, in the future were also prohibited from receiving Indian men to prevent syphilis. Once discovered, they would be dealt with strictly and without mercy. It was not because Marin was cruel, but because syphilis was too fierce and ravaged the world. Whether in Europe or Asia, syphilis killed too many people. Even many emperors died of syphilis. For example, Emperor Tongji, the biological son of Empress Dowager Cixi, contracted syphilis in the 8 Great Hutongs and died as a result. As for those who said that Emperor Tongji died of smallpox, it was pure nonsense. If it was smallpox, then others in the palace would not be able to escape death, including Empress Dowager Cixi and Empress Dowager Xian who had contact with the little emperor. Only syphilis would kill oneself and not affect others. The legend that Emperor Tongji died of smallpox was just to cover up Emperor Tongji's shame. Moreover, what else was contracted in the 8 great hutongs except syphilis? Syphilis is so fierce that Marin naturally does not allow immigrants to have relations with Indians. However, it is very unbearable to let a group of men live without women. Under the discomfort, these bastards will break the rules and look for Indian women. Even if they are too restrained, it is easy to cause the emergence of back mountains. When the British were developing the North American colonies in the early days, there were often bad incidents of hot-blooded young men raping cows. Maybe the legend of the Minotaur came from this. Because when the British colonized North America in the early days, it was mainly men, there were no women, and there was a serious lack of women. So, later on, bestiality appeared, and later, homosexuality appeared. So, people in later generations called Britain a corrupt country. Anyway, don't look at the serious appearance of the so-called British gentleman, but when you take off your tuxedo, you will see how playful the British are. Marin naturally did not want the kind of corruption and chaos that occurred when Britain colonized North America in later generations to appear, so he took advantage of the opportunity of the Crimean Khanate to rob Maumei every year to buy Maumei to supply the colony, so that the young men could feel at ease and avoid doing something immoral. Anyway, even if Marin did not intervene, the Tatar bandits of the Crimean Khanate would still go to Eastern Europe to rob tens of thousands of slaves every year. Marin's purchase only increased the amount, which did not affect the general situation. Moreover, those women were generally sold to the bearded men in Turkey. Instead of giving those bearded men a bargain, it is better to give the young men under his command a bargain. I am such a good leader who loves the people like his own children, and I am so concerned about the marriage of the people. Marin thought narcissistically. This is not Marin's boasting. In later times, no matter which country had an imbalance between men and women, no leader of any country cared about it. The leaders of European and American countries in later times were the most perverted. Their solution to the imbalance between men and women was very crude, that is, admitting homosexuality and encouraging homosexuality. Everyone is gay. Does the ratio of men to women still matter? You say there are more women. Then just do lesbian sex. See, how simple and crude. Only a honest official like Marin who loves the people like his own children and has a very positive outlook on life would help a bunch of bachelors under his rule to consider the issue of being single. Chapter 204, Taking Advantage of Others. Autumn is the harvest season. While people in Europe were busy harvesting food, the North American colonies, Cape Breton Island and the North American Twin Islands, also had a bumper harvest. Cape Breton Island is fine, because it is a high-latitude area and can only grow cold-resistant rye. The North American Twin Islands are different. In addition to growing rye, thousands of acres of soybeans are planted on Amerigo Island, Nantucket Island. Although the yield per mu of soybeans is low, even if all 3 fertilizers are used, the yield per mu is only about 200 pounds. However, thousands of acres are 6,000 acres of land. In total, the total soybean production reached 1.2 million pounds. Terra left 200,000 pounds of soybeans as seeds and emergency reserves, and the remaining 1 million pounds were all shipped back to Europe. Marin was also very happy to see millions of pounds of soybeans. After all, soybeans are excellent warhorse feed. So Marin asked people to fry some soybeans and feed them to the war horses. Sure enough, many war horses like the fragrant fried soybeans. Moreover, after eating fried soybeans, the war horse's physical strength recovered very quickly. Fried soybeans are not only crunchy, but also fragrant, which is very popular with war horses. Marin fried a large bowl of soybeans for his warhorse Karl. As a result, Karl felt that it was not enough after eating it, and kept winking at Marin, shovel shit, go and fry another bowl for your Uncle Ma. Having cooperated with Karl for so many years, Marin naturally understood Karl's hint. However, Marin does not need to do it himself. So, Marin ordered Karl's real shovel shit officer, the groom, to fry another large bowl of soybeans so that Uncle Karl can continue to enjoy it. As a result, Karl ate too much soybeans and kept farting. The whole stable became a biochemical battlefield, and Marin had to evacuate urgently. Back in the backyard of the palace, Marin took out a handful of fried soybeans and chewed them. Speaking of which, it has been almost 10 years since he traveled through time, and he doesn't remember the taste of soybeans very well. Then, little Caesar saw his father eating some unknown delicacy again, and it seemed very fragrant. So, the chubby little hand reached out. Unfortunately, Caesar was too young, and the fried soybeans were very hard. Caesar couldn't chew it, and he cried anxiously. "You only know how to bully your son, but that's our baby, the heir of the Hoffman family." Angela gave every upright Marin a blank look, and was busy coaxing his son. Originally, Marin wanted to share some fried soybeans with Angela. However, when he told Angela that eating too much fried soybeans would fart, Angela decisively refused. A lady like Angela would be ashamed to death if she farted uncontrollably. However, good things need to be shared. Since Angela and Caesar didn't eat fried soybeans, Marin remembered other uses of soybeans. For example, making tofu to eat. In the previous life, when Marin was a child. At that time, every Chinese New Year, Marin's mother would make tofu at home and prepare it for the new year. In the early years, rural people did not live a rich life, and only during the Chinese New Year could they be rich. However, the affluence mentioned here does not refer to killing pigs. Killing pigs was not available until the 1990s. As early as the 1980s, basically every family made a bucket of tofu, which was considered very affluence. Then, during the Chinese New Year, there was tofu to eat every day. As early as when Ma Lin's grandmother had not passed away, the family first used a stone mill to grind tofu, which was relatively slow. However, at that time, the New Year atmosphere was very strong, and rural people had nothing to do in winter, so they had plenty of time to prepare and grind slowly. Later, Master Wang at the entrance of the village introduced a machine for grinding tofu, and everyone went to Master Wang's house to grind the beans that had been soaked in water. After grinding, they came back and used a hanging basket made of gauze to roll and filter constantly, with a water tank waiting below. After filtering, the liquid in the water tank is raw soy milk, cooked. It is soy milk for breakfast, and the solids left in the gauze are the legendary tofu dregs. Then, people would put the raw soy milk into the pot and cook it. After that, it was time to make tofu. In Ma Lin's previous life, they all made tofu with brine. Brine is easy to get. Moreover, the tofu made from it is healthier. Unlike tofu made from gypsum, many workshops use industrial gypsum to make tofu for cheap. Industrial gypsum is toxic, so you can't eat too much gypsum tofu. After adding brine, the tofu in the cooked soy milk will condense from a free state to a tofu pudding state. To get block tofu, there is one last step, pressing the tofu. These tofu pudding-like tofu will be poured into gauze, and the soy milk containing brine will be filtered out. At this time, there is no soy milk in it, and soy milk is actually a solution of tofu in suspension, and the tofu will be left in the gauze. Then, the gauze wrapped with tofu will be tied tightly and placed on a flat plate. Then, a flat plate is pressed on the gauze, and a stone is pressed on the flat plate. After a while, the tofu is pressed. When the gauze is opened, the tofu inside looks like a super large white flour cake. The last step is naturally to cut the tofu into pieces with a knife. After the tofu is cut, it will be put into cold water to cool and preserve. The freshly pressed tofu is hot and tastes very good. However, the tofu cooled in cold water has no taste. In Marin's previous life, every time his mother made tofu and cut it, all the irregular edges and corners that could not be cut into blocks went into his stomach, and his brothers and sisters could not grab them from him. Thinking of everything in his previous life, Marin sighed. However, seeing his son Caesar's unhappy face, Marin decided to make tofu by himself. So, Marin soaked the beans first, waited for a few hours, and then started to make it. Of course, as the big boss, it is not Marin's turn to do the physical work of grinding beans, there are many people who can do it. After filtering the ground soybean dregs with gauze, Marin directed several chefs to cook the raw soybean milk, and then Marin personally ordered brine to turn the soybean milk into tofu brain. Then, after filtering, Marin began to press the tofu. Seeing Khan who was doing nothing on the side, Marin simply did not use stones to press, but let Khan go into battle and press with brute force. In this way, after a while, the steaming hot tofu was pressed. Before the freshly made tofu was soaked in cold water, it had an aroma, a bit like the taste of soybean milk. Little Caesar, who was visiting on the side, swallowed his saliva after smelling it, and Khan was also attracted by the aroma. As soon as the tofu was ready, Marin immediately cut a piece and prepared to put it in his mouth. However, seeing the little Caesar who was looking at him pitifully on the side, Marin remembered that he was already a father. So, the first piece of tofu went into the little Caesar's mouth. Although it was a little hot, the little Caesar liked the taste of hot tofu very much and clamored for more. On the side, Angela and Khan both showed interested expressions. As a result, the first pot of tofu in Europe was divided up by several people present before it was put into cold water. Actually, this is just the original way to eat tofu. There are many more delicious ways to eat it. Just when everyone was sighing about the deliciousness of hot tofu, Marin couldn't help but say. The consequence of Marin's words was that he made another pot of tofu. Next, it was time to cook with tofu. Originally, Marin planned to make mapo tofu. Unfortunately, he didn't have chili oil at that time. So Marin made a fish head tofu instead. The fish tastes delicious, and the tofu is tender. After the fish head tofu is served, sprinkle with green onions, it becomes a fresh, fragrant and tender delicacy. Of course, the key to this dish is to use cooking wine to remove the fishy smell, otherwise the taste will be very fishy. As a half-old driver in the chef world, Marin naturally knows how to use cooking wine to deal with the fishy smell. So, the fish head tofu that came out of the pot became a delicious meal that was fresh, fragrant and tender. Sadly, this portion of fish head tofu didn't seem to be enough to eat. Not long after it was served on the table, Marin just went to the kitchen to make a tofu soup, and when he turned back, he found that the fish head tofu was gone. This dish is very suitable for little Caesar, dear, make more in the future. Angela wiped her mouth gracefully after eating. Little Caesar looked innocent. This dish is indeed suitable for this baby, but this baby didn't eat a few bites, and it was eaten up by you adults. Chapter 2052 Similar Attacks. In Cork, Ireland, after 2 or 3 months of preparation, Earl Edward was finally ready to attack the MacMorrough dynasty in the southeast of Ireland. Prior to this, Edward sent people to contact Scotland and France. The two countries were also very happy when they heard that Earl Edward was going to rise up. Because Earl Edward said that after taking down the MacMorrough dynasty, he would attack the Pale and the county of Kildare. This was completely the rhythm of making things bigger, which made Scotland and France ecstatic. Before, Louis XII was still angry that Earl Edward was disobedient and unwilling to attack Calais. This also led to a sharp decrease in France's support for Earl Edward in the past 2 years, far less than the support of the Scots. However, at this moment, Earl Edward suddenly rose up and said that he was going to attack Dublin, which made Louis XII very happy. After all, for the British, the importance of Dublin is no less than that of Calais, or even higher than that of Calais. After all, since the end of the 100 Years' War between England and France, France has grown into a European hegemonic power after the baptism of war. Calais is a nail and foothold that Britain has inserted into the European continent, but it has actually lost its important significance. Because now Britain cannot compete with France in terms of national strength. At most, it can only act as a spoiler to make France restless, but it can't repeat the situation of sweeping across France during the 100 Years' War between England and France. Therefore, Calais now is more of a thought for the British, but it is not very practical. But Dublin is different. Dublin is the main base of Britain on the island of Ireland. Although the British have long claimed that the island of Ireland is their territory, and the king has also declared himself the Duke of Ireland. However, the territory of the British royal family on the island of Ireland is only the Pale, centered on Dublin. Moreover, its core is in Dublin. The British king's control over the island of Ireland is completely centered around Dublin. If Earl Edward conquers Dublin, he can not only greatly expand his own territory and strength, but also make the British royal family lose its only base on the island of Ireland, thereby losing control of the entire island of Ireland. Therefore, the importance of Dublin is more important than Calais. After hearing that Earl Edward was going to attack Dublin, Louis XII immediately instructed the Minister of Finance to allocate funds to help Earl Edward hire another 2,000 mercenaries. Moreover, according to Earl Edward's request, a fleet was sent to block the coast of the Pale area after the war to prevent the news from leaking out. At the same time, on the Scottish side, James IV also greatly appreciated Earl Edward's plan. Scotland is different from France. They face England directly and are under much more pressure than France. They are more supportive and happy about Earl Edward's attempt to drive English forces out of the island of Ireland. Because England will definitely not be willing to lose control of the island of Ireland. At that time, the British will have to fight. And Scotland can also happily watch the English people get into trouble. Therefore, King James IV of Scotland selected 1,000 elite warriors from the Scottish Highland warriors and joined Earl Edward's side in the name of mercenaries. At the same time, Scotland also sent a fleet, intending to join the French to blockade the eastern coast of the island of Ireland after the war. However, for the sake of safety, Earl Edward planned to launch the attack after the autumn harvest. The reason why it was set after the autumn harvest was that the Pale region, as a direct territory of the King of England, would definitely transfer several ships of grain from the Pale region as taxes every year after the autumn harvest. And these grains were collected and transported by the Earl of Kildare, who was in charge of the Pale region. However, in normal times, there was little contact between England and Ireland. If there were more exchanges, the King of England would not have entrusted the Earl of Kildare to take charge of the Pale region. Except for sending ships to Dublin to take away the grain and taxes that should be collected after the autumn harvest every year, there was relatively little contact between England and the island of Ireland. Of course, some local merchant ships were an exception. After all, there were merchants who pulled goods to Ireland for sale. Therefore, if Earl Edward rashly launched an attack before the end of the autumn harvest, then the British royal transport ships that came to transport tax grain would definitely bring back news of the changes on the island of Ireland to England. In this way, Henry VII would have the opportunity to prepare. However, Earl Edward is still relatively weak and cannot withstand the full attack of Henry VII. Therefore, Earl Edward followed the advice sent by Marin through the North Sea Chamber of Commerce. He disguised himself as the monarch of the McCarthy dynasty established by the descendants of the Kingdom of Munster to confuse the British. Even the flag that Earl Edward temporarily used was changed to the flag of the McCarthy royal family. When Earl Edward attacked the McMorrow dynasty, the British in Dublin probably thought it was a fight between local forces on the island of Ireland. By the time they reacted, the army had already surrounded Dublin. At the same time, the French and Scottish fleets would blockade the eastern waters of Ireland for a period of time, giving Earl Edward enough time to conquer Dublin and the county of Kildare and complete the digestion. In this way, when the British reacted, Earl Edward had already established a firm foothold and had the ability to confront Henry VII. In this way, when the spies sent by Earl Edward to Dublin reported that the British royal family's grain collection ship had left, Earl Edward officially led the army to attack the McMorrow dynasty. Edward's army crossed the sea directly to the McMorrow dynasty in the east. With the help of French and Scottish ships, Edward's 8,000 troops boarded the ship directly, bypassed the county of Wexford, and landed directly on the east coast of the McMorrow dynasty. Then, the army unloaded the 20 12-pound bronze cannons reinforced by Marin from the ship and headed directly to the capital of the McMorrow dynasty, Wicklow City. At the same time, on the distant Italian peninsula, Gonzalo de Cordova also completed the tactical drill of artillery plus blasting, and the army began to set off towards several important French strongholds such as Naples. The situation of the French army was very bad at this time. A very bad news just came from the Duchy of Milan. The former Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, came back with his army. Since Ludovico Sforza had recaptured Milan, he would naturally no longer provide food to the more than 30,000 French troops on the Naples front. In this way, the French land supply line was cut off at once. Although there was still a little food in stock, the army of more than 30,000 people would eat it very quickly. Originally, the French were counting on the autumn harvest of the Duchy of Milan. As a result, seeing that the autumn harvest was completed, a lot of food was gathered and prepared to be shipped to the Naples front. At this time, Ludovico Sforza suddenly rushed out and intercepted all the food of the Duchy of Milan. This result was something the French never expected. Therefore, the morale of the French army was greatly hit. Although Genoa, as a force close to France, expressed its willingness to transport food from mainland France. However, the temporary change of plan made the French panic. It is indeed difficult to get enough food in a short period of time. Moreover, the French did not dare to divide their troops to attack Ludovico Sforza at this time. Because, at this time, the Spaniards were suppressing France. You can't win with more people, let alone divide your troops. Therefore, even though they knew that the Duchy of Milan had fallen, the French did not dare to send troops to rescue it, in order to avoid being taken advantage of by the Spanish. Moreover, even if they sent troops, it would be difficult to recapture the Duchy of Milan. With a tall and solid wall like the one in Milan, unless there was an insider like Lao Lu who opened the city gates, it would take several months to capture Milan. Gonzalo obviously knew that the morale of the French army in Naples was unstable at this time. However, as an enemy, he had no sympathy for the French. He just felt that the opportunity should not be missed. So, Gonzalo took 20,000 troops and took advantage of the unstable morale of the French army to attack the 20,000 French troops in Naples. The 10 heavy artillery were lined up in front of the Oak City Gate and began to bombard the south gate of Naples in order to blast a hole to place the gunpowder barrel. In this way, two attacks launched by different forces in different regions, because of Marin, both adopted the method of artillery bombardment plus gunpowder barrel blasting. Faced with the All Oak City Gate, the effect of this method couldn't be better. Chapter 206. It's too late. The landing process of Edward's army was very smooth. In order to help Edward's 8,000 troops land, King Louis XII of France and King James IV of Scotland not only mobilized the domestic fleet to help, but also mobilized a large number of fishing boats to help transport people. Edward's army landed in the coastal town of Arklow, about 21 kilometers south of Wicklow City. There were only dozens of garrisons here. Edward's army directly attacked and easily controlled the town of Arklow. Then, the army relied on the dock of Arklow fishing port to land in an orderly manner. Because the number of long-bridged docks was insufficient, many manned ships needed to wait. Therefore, as a representative of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, Sashi, the deputy captain of the demolition team, who was aliased as Dane Jonathan, suggested requisitioning small fishing boats at Arklow fishing port, allowing fishermen to row small fishing boats and small fishing boats to pick up people from the big ships in the sea, and then return to land. The docking of small fishing boats is very convenient and not easy to run aground. Even if it runs aground, a few people can lift it and leave the shoal. Therefore, small fishing boats can easily land on the shore, and the requirements for the dock are very low. Sahi participated in the battle of attacking East Frisia from Texel Island. At that time, many of the troops landed by wading. After approaching the beach with small fishing boats, the soldiers waded directly to the shore. Therefore, Sahi expressed his ideas and got the support of Earl Edward. After all, Arklow only has 2 long bridge docks, and each dock can only dock 1 or 2 large ships at a time. It is too slow for 8,000 people to land at 2 docks. After using the small fishing boats of nearby residents, the speed of landing was indeed accelerated. Although waiting on the beach will make the shoes and trousers completely wet, it is very uncomfortable. However, Earl Edward ordered people to set up a fire on the beach. Those soldiers who waited to land can directly dry their shoes and trousers around the fire, which is convenient. In this way, the 8,000 troops that might have taken 2 or 3 days to land were landed in half a day, and the baggage and artillery were also moved up. The French in Edward's army were very confused about the 20 bronze cannons that suddenly appeared in Earl Edward's army. The style of these cannons is similar to that of French cannons. However, the French officers who came to help Earl Edward on the orders of the King of France had never heard of the domestic support for Earl Edward's cannons. However, Louis XII was also generous. Although Louis XII did not know who helped Earl Edward cast the cannons, he still provided Earl Edward with a lot of gunpowder and iron ball shells. As a famous artillery power in Europe, the French are not short of saltpeter. Because the French have long begun to collect saltpeter from the side of the manure pit on a large scale. Even because he was afraid that Earl Edward did not have qualified artillerymen, Louis XII sent 100 excellent artillerymen to help use the artillery, so as to avoid wasting shells without qualified artillerymen under Earl Edward. After resting for 2 days in the small town of Arklow, the army regrouped and set out on the road to the north. Arklow is only a little over 21 kilometers away from Wicklow. Although the army of Earl Edward marched slowly, it set out early in the morning and arrived at Wicklow at noon, and surrounded Wicklow. Murkiartak, the monarch of the MacMurrough dynasty, still claiming to be the king of Leinster, was shocked and immediately mobilized troops to resist. However, because Earl Edward did not send a messenger to Wicklow to report the news when he landed. Therefore, Wicklow city had no time to mobilize troops from all over the country to help defend the city. Therefore, there were only 2,000 defenders in Wicklow city at this time. If the whole country was mobilized, perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 people could be mobilized. However, Edward's army came too quickly and did not leak the news, which naturally caught Murkiartak off guard. In desperation, King Murkiartak had to command the only 2,000 soldiers in the city to defend the city. But what surprised King Murkiartak was that the army that seemed to be from the McCarthy dynasty of the Kingdom of Munster that surrounded Wicklow city did not bring siege ladders. However, they dragged out something that King Murkiartak had never seen before. Fortunately, someone in Wicklow city had insight and recognized that it was artillery. Under the control of 100 French artillerymen, 20 12-pound cannons were aimed at the west gate of Wicklow city. Murkiartak didn't understand why, and shouted loudly on the top of the city, demanding to negotiate with the people of the McCarthy dynasty, the descendants of the Kingdom of Munster, and said that the common enemy of the Irish was the British, and they should not kill each other. If they were real people from the McCarthy dynasty, they might have listened to it. However, Earl Edward was originally a fake member of the McCarthy dynasty, and he just waved the flag of the McCarthy dynasty. Moreover, Earl Edward was an Englishman. Therefore, Earl Edward would naturally ignore King Murkiartak's persuasion, but let the artillery bombard the west gate as originally planned. Boom 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 dash, the huge sound of artillery came, almost scaring King Murkiartak to fall off the city wall. All the Irish soldiers standing on the top of the city were also shocked, and their morale plummeted. After all, humans are very afraid of unknown things. At this time, the island of Ireland was a remote rural area in Europe, and few people came here. Naturally, the locals had never seen artillery. Therefore, everyone was completely unfamiliar with artillery. The earth-shaking sound of the artillery, like a thunder, frightened the Irish. Many Irish soldiers even mistakenly thought that it was a divine punishment from God. They threw down their weapons and knelt directly on the top of the city to pray. However, reality was cruel. No matter how devoutly the Irish prayed to God, the next day, the west gate was blasted with a big hole by 20 cannons. Of course, behind the big hole were bricks and wood piled up by the defenders in the city. Sahi, who used the alias Jonathan, went into battle in person. He carried a door panel as protection, a gunpowder barrel on his back, and a fuse tied to his left hand to ignite the gunpowder barrel. After blasting a big hole in the west gate, the French artillerymen, under the guidance of Sahi, used artillery shells to suppress the tower above the west gate so that the Irish army guarding the city could not raise their heads. The iron ball shells whizzed past, and the defenders on the west gate really couldn't raise their heads. Once they raised their heads, it was easy for the iron ball shells to take away their heads, leaving only a headless body and blood spurting. After a few unlucky guys were successfully turned into terrible headless ghosts by the iron ball shells, the Irish defenders on the west gate really didn't dare to show their heads. Then, Sahi picked up the door panel and rushed to the west gate with a gunpowder barrel on his back. When he came to the west gate, while the Irish defenders on the top of the city could not attack him, Sahi took out a small iron pickaxe and began to clean the big hole. He dug a hole in the bricks and stones in the big hole, just in time to put in the gunpowder barrel and leave the fuse. Then, he buried the bricks and stones that had been dug up before, so that the gunpowder barrel could be buried in the middle to maximize its explosive power. After burying the gunpowder barrel, Sahi blew the match tied to his left arm and lit the long fuse. Then, Sahi quickly lifted the door panel as a cover and ran away quickly. After a while, there was a loud bang, and the west gate of Wicklow City was blown up. Not only was the gate broken, but the bricks and stones used to block the gate were also scattered all over the ground. At this time, a large gap appeared in the gate. Earl Edward knew that the opportunity could not be missed, so a team of French sword and shield soldiers took the lead and rushed directly to the blown-up gate. The other soldiers, except for the troops, artillery, and baggage troops of the other 3 gates, all followed. At this time, the Irish defenders in the city had not recovered from the shock of the artillery fire. As a result, the Irish defenders were killed and even the king of Muirkirk was captured. Jean-Paul, a French officer sent by King Louis XII of France to assist Count Edward, was also shocked by the results of the battle. You know, at this time, sieges in Europe usually take several months. Unlike the current situation, it only takes 2 days. So Jean-Paul quickly wrote a letter to Louis XII, describing the characteristics of this siege. Moreover, Jean-Paul, who has a unique vision, suggested that metal gates should be used to prevent artillery fire. In particular, on the battlefield in southern Italy, the city of Naples should replace the metal gates to avoid being taken advantage of by the Spaniards. The letter was quickly sent back to Paris by the French Navy warship and was also valued by Louis XII. Unfortunately, everything was too late. Because when Louis XII received Jean-Paul's letter, the Spanish army also drove to the city of Naples. Even if the French wanted to replace the metal gates, it was too late. They couldn't replace the gates under the noses of the Spanish army, right? Moreover, building a metal gate would require a lot of manpower and material resources. Not to mention that it would take a long time for the order to be delivered from Paris to Naples. If Jean-Paul's letter had been delivered to Paris 2 months earlier, there might have been better results. But it was too late. Because of lack of time, the city of Naples had no chance to replace the metal gates, and didn't even have the chance to cover the outside of the gates with a layer of iron sheets, and the Spanish came to the door. Moreover, the Spaniards also brought out artillery and began to bombard the gates of Naples. So, Jean-Paul's letter came too late. Chapter 207, Prepare for a Rainy Day. When war broke out in the east of Ireland and the north of Naples at the same time, Stade in Rome, who received the news, was also ready to attack Florence. However, whether the city gate can be opened requires the Medici family to send a signal to confirm that they can cooperate with each other inside and outside before notifying Stade. Then, Stade led the army to attack Florence. At the same time, Julius II also needed to prepare enough horses for Stade's army. After all, there are more than 200 kilometers from Rome to Florence. For such a long distance, it will take at least 2 days to arrive even at a fast pace. Moreover, one person needs 2 horses. Therefore, Julius II needs 14,000 horses, whether it is war horses or draft horses, which takes a certain amount of time to prepare. When Julius II prepared the horses, Stade's army can almost set off, and they are all lightly equipped, and they don't plan to bring artillery. Otherwise, it will delay the journey. Of course, once the raid is successful and the news is passed back to Rome, Rome will hire some Italian mercenaries to help take over Florence. Although the Italian mercenaries are less powerful than the German mercenaries, they are still enough to defend the city. The premise is that as long as they don't encounter internal and external attacks. Marin has actually made preparations for the problem of internal and external attacks. Since the capture of Rome, in order to avoid being attacked from inside and outside again. Now, every night, the defenders will set up a line of defense behind the city gate and arrange hundreds of people to guard the line of defense to prevent the city gate from being captured. Moreover, now the inside of the city gate is no longer just a bolt, but a large iron lock is added to each city gate. Even if the attackers break through the line of defense and reach the back of the city gate, they will face a huge iron lock. The key to the iron lock is not in the hands of the defenders in the city gate hole, but in the hands of the officers in the military camp in the city. Every morning, the officers send a team of soldiers to each city gate to issue iron lock keys to open the city gate. In this way, even if a commando breaks through the city gate hole, it will not be able to open the big iron lock in a short time. During this delay, the defenders on the city wall had already reacted, came down to support, and would eliminate the enemies who broke into the city gate. This method has begun to be implemented in cities in East Frisia, making the method of internal and external cooperation extremely difficult. However, in Rome, only the method of increasing the inner defense of the city gate has been implemented for the time being, and the method of large iron locks has not been implemented. This is mainly because they are afraid that Florence will learn it. Florence now has more business ties with Rome, and Marin is also afraid that this secret will be learned by the Florentines, so that Florence will not be able to fight. Even if the inner defense line of the city gate is increased, Stade, at Marin's request, has tried his best to conceal and enhance strength to avoid attracting the attention and cottages of the Florentines. While all parties in Italy are gearing up, Marin in East Frisia is not idle either. What is Marin doing? He is preparing to take over the bishopric of Munster. Before that, Marin and Julius II discussed it. Both of them thought that it was simple to award the bishopric of Munster to Marin, but it was still very troublesome for Marin to really get control of the bishopric of Munster. Therefore, in the process of accepting the bishopric of Munster, it was necessary for Marin to show his muscles and suppress those who were unwilling to lose power in the bishopric of Munster. According to the agreement between Marin and Julius II, the religious power of the archbishop of the bishopric of Munster will continue to be retained. However, the secular power will be obtained by Marin. But the problem is that all the glory and wealth are obtained because of secular power. Even if the Bishop of Munster is willing to give up, the officials and nobles in charge of secular power in the bishopric of Munster are not happy. Therefore, some resistance is inevitable. After all, no one is willing to withdraw from the stage of history easily. What Marin has to do is to use a strong army to enter the bishopric of Munster, force those who are rebellious to bow their heads, and make them realize the cruel reality of die if you don't obey. Moreover, a large number of troops are needed to garrison the bishopric of Munster. The bishopric of Munster is currently in its most glorious period. Its total land area is estimated to be 7,000 square kilometers, which is larger than the bishopric of Munster on the German regional situation map of 1648 that Marin had seen. It seems that during the religious wars that broke out in the mid-16th century, the bishopric of Munster lost some territory. Later, there were only more than 6,000 square kilometers left. The reason why Marin wanted the bishopric of Munster so much was because the south of the bishopric of Munster was close to the Ruhr area, right? Even part of the territory extended into the Ruhr area. Now, the control of the Ruhr region mainly belongs to the Principality of Clever, the westernmost part of the Rhine River, mainly an agricultural area, with little coal. The county of Vest, which is next to the Principality of Clever, has a lot of coal, and the famous steel city of Essen is currently in the territory of Vest. Further east is the Ruhr region of the Mark, which is the largest and has the most coal mines, and part of it belongs to the free city of Dortmund, which has an area of several hundred square kilometers. In addition to these forces, there are some other forces further east of the Ruhr, but there are basically no coal mines there. The most core areas are mainly the Ruhr region of the Mark and the West. It should be pointed out that the country of Westerland was annexed by the Archbishopric of Cologne during the Cologne War that broke out in 1582–83. The reason was that Westerland was on the Protestant side and was a pagan. Then, the whole country was destroyed. The previous statement that this place belonged to the bishopric of Munster was wrong. The map that Lao Nyo got was a map after the Cologne War. Moreover, the color of the former Westerland in the Ruhr area was the same as that of the bishopric of Munster, and both belonged to the Archbishopric of Cologne, so Lao Nyo made a mistake. But strangely, there is no detailed introduction to the country of Westerland on Wikipedia English, and it is a blank. The bishopric of Munster also has part of its territory that crosses the Lippe River and goes deep into the Ruhr area. This part happens to be connected to Dortmund, and it seems that it is for the purpose of strengthening economic ties with Dortmund. After all, Dortmund is also a commercial city, and being connected with Dortmund must have great trade benefits. In order to smoothly take over the bishopric of Munster, Marin sent Schwarz, who had just been brought back, to the southern German mountains to recruit soldiers. This time, Marin planned to recruit 7,000 soldiers. These 7,000 people were actually intended to be stationed in the Munster area in the future. After all, the bishopric of Munster is so large that it also needs manpower to be stationed. In addition, because there are 7,000 troops in Rome in the south. When the matter in Florence is over, Marin plans to keep 5,000 people stationed in Rome for a long time to ensure his influence on Rome. As for the other 2,000 people, they will withdraw to their homeland, or stationed in East Frisia, or in the Munster area. However, Marin could not count on these 7,000 recruits to complete the battle to take over the bishopric of Munster. For this reason, Marin planned to dispatch the 8,000 main forces left in the country to do this. The 7,000 people followed the main force, training and gaining experience. After the opposition forces in the bishopric of Munster were extinguished, these 7,000 people stayed in Munster as garrisons. Moreover, Marin believed that the core high-level officials of the Bishop of Munster were all in the city of Munster. As long as the city of Munster was taken, the people at the highest level of the Bishop of Munster would be under his control. As for people in other areas, they could be dealt with slowly. Therefore, Marin had already made plans to conquer the city of Munster. As long as the city of Munster was taken, the Bishop of Munster would be forced to surrender. At the same time, the generals who commanded the troops of the Bishop of Munster in the city of Munster would be controlled. Those small characters below would not be able to make any waves. For this reason, Marin asked Kohler to set up a new chamber of commerce and send people to the Bishop of Munster to collect various intelligence. In addition, he also sent people to lurk in the city of Munster to see if there was an opportunity to cooperate with Marin's army. Now, as the details of several major wars gradually began to circulate in Europe, opportunities like internal and external cooperation are expected to become less and less. After all, those princes are not fools. When people are frequently hit, the defense of the city gate will definitely be taken seriously. Therefore, things like internal and external cooperation will be difficult to accomplish in the future. This time, sending people to the city of Munster to see if there is such an opportunity is also a matter of luck. If the commander-in-chief of the army of the Bishop of Munster is an idiot, he will give Kohler's men the opportunity to cooperate internally and externally. If the coach of the Bishop of Munster is a shrewd man, then, Marin plans to take a strong attack. Anyway, Marin is now open-minded about the matter of internal and external cooperation. His point of view is if I get it, I'm lucky, if I lose it, I'll die. Anyway, Marin has made many preparations. If one method doesn't work, then change to another. In short, as long as you are fully prepared, there is always a way that suits you. Chapter 208, Capturing Florence. A few days later, Julius II tried his best to gather 14,000 horses for the army. Most of the horses were draft horses, bought from farmers around Rome. Because the war was urgent, Julius II could not care so much and directly adopted the means of forced purchase. Of course, the money given was not small. After all, Julius II was not short of money, especially after raiding the Borgia family. Of course, in fact, he didn't need to take the money himself, but took it directly from the treasury of the Holy See. In Florence, the intelligence of the Medici family soon came, they were ready. According to the agreement, Stade's army will arrive at the east gate of Florence, and near the east gate, there happens to be a follower of the Medici family, who owns a large mansion here, which is suitable for ambushing troops. According to the agreement, as long as the army arrives and fires double cannons into the air, the other side will start to snatch the east gate and put in the army. At this time, there were a total of 5,000 Italian mercenaries in Florence. However, according to the intelligence of the Medici family, the military discipline of these Italian mercenaries was lax and they often disturbed the people, which made Machiavelli, the official leader of the Republic, angry and threatened to dismiss all mercenaries and establish a national army. In fact, Machiavelli's suggestion was indeed realized. However, it was not realized until 1505. At present, the official of the Florentine Republic is arguing over whether to abandon mercenaries and establish a national army instead. Piero Soderini, the governor of the Florentine Republic, supported Machiavelli's proposal to establish a national army. He also felt the lax discipline of the mercenaries and the harm to the people in the city. However, Florence is a republic, not an autocratic country. Although he is the governor, Piero Soderini can only support Machiavelli's proposal and try to win over more parliamentarians, but he cannot make arbitrary decisions. Therefore, this matter cannot be settled for the time being. However, Machiavelli's remarks angered the mercenaries responsible for defending the city. After all, Machiavelli is going to destroy their jobs. Therefore, the mercenaries were not in a good mood towards Machiavelli. If Machiavelli was not a high-ranking official, the group of Italian mercenaries would have beaten him up. The mercenaries still acted as they pleased, continued to disturb the people in Florence, and occasionally harmed the young girls and wives. Of course, the Italian mercenaries were not as barbaric and brutal as the Japanese devils. These Italian mercenaries came by means of hooking up. In this era, even in the prosperous city of Florence, there were many poor people. These Italian mercenaries had money, so they bought a lot of food, or some flowered cloth, to hook up with the young girls and wives in the city. Not to mention that there were really women who fell for this method. After all, Italian women were not good people. It takes two to tango to hook up with a man. When both men and women were very coquettish, some big scales were staged. The city hall kept receiving complaints from ordinary citizens, mainly men who were cuckolded, demanding severe punishment for those dissolute mercenaries. These men are not lacking in courage, but revenge is futile in front of organized soldiers, and commanding makes oneself more unlucky. Therefore, complaints became the only way. However, there are also factions within the Republic. Some Florentine bosses believe that these trivial matters are just family matters and are not worth the official intervention. Moreover, as long as the mercenaries do not use force, it is not illegal. With the support of the official bosses, those mercenaries are even more arrogant. According to the intelligence provided by the Medici family, every night, 3,000 of the 5,000 Florentine mercenaries can stay in the barracks and on the city walls. The remaining 2,000 people went to pick up girls. Therefore, if a surprise attack is launched, the success rate is still very high. Stade was very nervous. After all, this was the first time he led an army alone to complete a very important task. Before, he followed Marin or Schwartz and everything was under command. Of course, Stade was also very excited. He knew the opportunities brought by this war. If the city of Florence was successfully captured, then he would become a hero of the Papal States. What is the Papal States? It is the center of European religion. The Pope is the leader of Christians in the world and the spokesperson of God on earth. Stade is sure that as long as he takes Florence for the Papal States, his master Marin will certainly get huge benefits. But at the same time, as the main general of this battle, he will also be famous for thousands of years and be rewarded by the Pope. Therefore, Stade is very concerned about this raid. Because it is a raid, the army did not bring any baggage this time, and each person only brought a small bag of dry food. If it fails, the army will immediately get into trouble. Moreover, the distance of this raid is too long. Along the Roman road, the total marching distance is about 280 kilometers. Although the straight-line distance between the two places is only about 230 kilometers, the terrain of the Italian peninsula is complex and some places need to be detoured. Therefore, if you take the Roman road, the total distance is about 280 kilometers. If one person and two horses are on the road, if you cherish the horsepower, you can run at most about 120 kilometers a day. However, in this way, it will take more than 2 days. After thinking about it, Julius II decided to let Stade rush on the road at full speed, even if some horses died. Compared with the huge benefits of the Republic of Florence, the death of some horses is nothing. So Stade led his army and started to rush at a speed of 150 kilometers a day. 2 days later, when the army arrived near the city of Florence, it was counted that 4,000 horses had died. And the 10,000 horses that were alive were also listless. Fortunately, each of the soldiers brought a small bag of oats. After feeding the horses some oats, Stade hurriedly asked everyone to take the opportunity to rest. At the same time, release the cavalry sentry, ride the war horses with good physical strength, patrol around, intercept all those going to Florence, and avoid leaking the news. This good habit is what Marin has always emphasized. Every time you rush, keep it confidential. After resting for half a day, it was almost 10 o'clock in the evening. At this time, Stade arranged for people to gather the horses together and find someone to look after them. And he himself, with his soldiers, quietly moved towards the east gate of Florence. At 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, in the quiet night, 2 explosions suddenly sounded. It was Stade's people setting off firecrackers. The Medici family's best friends hiding in a large courtyard near the east gate of Florence were stunned, and then they realized that the opportunity had come. So, about 150 guards and servants with high military strength sent by several Medici family followers, holding swords, mustered up the courage to rush to the east gate. However, these raiders contacted by the Medici family, Unlike the professionals sent by Marin, all wore full body armor and held shields. They were all wearing ordinary clothes, but they were holding swords in their hands, not very professional. Although these people can be regarded as good martial artists. However, due to the lack of protection, they suffered great losses when attacking the city gate. After hearing about the experience of the city of Rome, Machiavelli attached great importance to the defense of the city gate. As an official in charge of military affairs, he repeatedly asked the mercenaries to perform their duties at night. Moreover, enough people should be sent to protect the city gates. Originally, according to Machiavelli's idea, the soldiers guarding the city gates should be increased from 30 or 40 to about 200. This order was indeed passed down. Unfortunately, half of the 200 mercenaries guarding the east gate went to the city to pick up girls that night. If the 200 mercenaries were still there, then the 150 dead soldiers who attacked the city gates would probably be finished. But fortunately, due to the poor military discipline of the Italian mercenaries, only 100 people were on duty. With the suddenness of the raid, the Medici family's soldiers caught the Italian mercenaries off guard. But the defenders had the advantage of the terrain after all. As a result, the two sides fought fiercely and alarmed the defenders on the top of the city. Stade saw that it was bad, and there were troops on the top of the city running down. It seemed that the raid had encountered trouble. Suddenly, drops of cold sweat flowed from his forehead. If this operation failed, it would be a big trouble. Moreover, he would lose all his glory. At this time, he suddenly remembered the several claw hooks brought from Friesland. It is said that it was used by Marin to form a special forces. However, there is no shadow of the legendary special forces. According to Marin's plan, the agile Dithmarschen General Cage should be the most suitable candidate to lead the special forces. However, Cage's current loyalty is not enough, so Marin has temporarily suspended the formation of the special forces. It will not be too late to form it when Cage is more loyal. Stade was quite interested in the grappling hooks used for climbing the city walls, so he asked for a few and played with his own soldiers, treating it as an entertainment project. However, the situation was urgent and Stade could not sit still. If the Medici family in the city failed to attack the city gate, then everything would be over. So Stade made up his mind and shouted to the guards, "Give me my grappling hook." Several guards looked at each other, not knowing what their boss was crazy about. The grappling hook was used for ordinary games, could it be? "General, what are you going to do? Climb the city wall? There must be something wrong with the Italian bastards in the city. Now we have to climb the city wall, and we have to move quickly. Otherwise, no one can attack the city." "No, you are the commander, you can't take risks. According to military law, if you take risks and get hurt, we will all be executed." Several guards were shocked, fearing that Stade would be upset. Marin's military law is very strict. Then you go up, you must seize that section of the city wall, and then support the battle in the city gate. Yes. Several guards gritted their teeth, and were forced to do so. Coincidentally, the dozens of mercenaries on the section of the city wall that Stade's army was facing had all gone down to reinforce the city gate. So, several guards of Stade ran over and threw the grappling hooks. After trying several times, the 5 grappling hooks that Stade usually brought all hooked the city wall. Then, several guards took the lead in climbing up. Then, Stade asked another group of soldiers to climb up along the ropes of the grappling hooks. After a total of 30 people climbed up, the panicked Italian mercenaries on the top of the city wall discovered that someone was climbing the city wall here. So, a group of Italian mercenaries rushed up. However, the city wall was very narrow, and the hundreds of Italian mercenaries who rushed over were blocked by the desperate obstruction of the 30 elite soldiers who climbed up to the top of the city. Then, more elite soldiers climbed up along the ropes. After hundreds of elite soldiers climbed up, they immediately defeated the group of Italian mercenaries on the city wall. Then, Stade shouted from the bottom of the city, "Don't worry about the group of rubbish on the top of the city wall, go down and reinforce the city gate, and make sure to open the city gate." So, hundreds of elite soldiers went down the stairs directly to the city wall and rushed to the city gate of the East Gate. At this time, a fierce fight was going on in the gate of the East Gate. Although the Medici family's dead soldiers had eliminated most of the guards of the city gate, there were still more than 40 guards of the city gate who were struggling to guard the city gate with obstacles such as shields, tables and chairs. At the same time, about 200 Italian mercenaries came down from the city wall and were attacking the Medici family's dead soldiers from behind. At this time, it was already a very critical moment. Only 80 of the 150 Medici family's dead soldiers were left. If they waited a little longer, they would be finished. At this critical moment, suddenly, a group of soldiers rushed down from the top of the city wall, rushed towards the 200 Italian mercenaries who were attacking the Medici family's backs, and quickly defeated them. Stade's guards arrived with a group of elite soldiers. After defeating the Italian mercenaries attacking the city gate, they did not hesitate and rushed in to launch a fierce attack on the last 40 guards of the city gate. After a while, those guards were finally eliminated. Then, the east gate was opened. Stade took this opportunity to lead the army into the city of Florence. Chapter 209, Capturing Machiavelli. At this time, the city of Florence was in chaos. The fierce shouts and cries from the east gate were so harsh in the quiet midnight. So the whole city of Florence was alarmed. Seeing many citizens of Florence running out, Stade's heart tightened. Because he remembered the bloody night in Emden. On that night, the citizens of Emden fought against Marin's army one after another. Many people died, but they still went forward bravely, which caused Marin a lot of trouble. If it weren't for the absolute advantage in manpower, there might be big problems. At present, Stade's army has only 2,000 more than the mercenaries in Florence. The manpower is not too much of an advantage. If you encounter a group of fanatical and desperate citizens, it will be bad. However, what surprised Stade was that many citizens of Florence came out, but most of them were watching the excitement. Although they were full of indignation when they saw Stade's army flying the flag of the Papal States, not many of them dared to stand up and fight. This is also the difference between Germans and Italians. Germans are martial and will pick up weapons to fight you if they don't like you. Italians, on the other hand, prefer to talk nonsense. Those Italian citizens with angry eyes wanted to rush up and debate with Stade for 300 rounds. Unfortunately, these soldiers were all Germans and could not understand Italian. Of course, Stade's army had clear goals and strict discipline, which was also an important reason why the citizens of Florence did not resist. Under the guidance of the guide party sent by the Medici family, Stade's army first attacked the mercenary camp and 3 gates of Florence. At the same time, some troops were divided to capture the top leaders of the Republic. You know, although the Republic of Florence is large, the core top leaders are all in Florence, and they live in clusters. Therefore, Stade sent 800 people to block the exits of the residential areas of the dignitaries, and only waited for the battle at the barracks and the gates to end before rushing in to take people. Stade divided the main force into 2, and he personally led 4,000 troops to attack the mercenary camp in the city. The other 1,200 people went to seize the other 3 city gates to prevent anyone from escaping. The progress of the 4 armies was very smooth, although the mercenaries in the camp put up a brave resistance. However, there were less than 2,000 people in the camp. When the mercenaries who went out to pick up girls saw the danger, they simply changed their clothes and pretended to be passers-by and no longer showed up. In this way, there were only less than 2,000 people in the camp against Stade's 4,000 veterans, and the outcome was already doomed. When Stade broke through the mercenary camp and captured the Italian mercenary leader, good news came from other directions. The 800 people who controlled the powerful area successfully blocked all the exits of the powerful area and blocked the high-ranking officials of the Republic who tried to escape. The detachments that went to control the other 3 city gates had already succeeded in the South Gate and the West Gate. Only the North Gate seemed to have some Italian mercenaries trying to escape from the North Gate, and happened to have a fierce battle with the 400 people who went to seize the North Gate, and they were deadlocked there for a while. Stade quickly sent out his elite troops to the North Gate, defeated and captured the Italian mercenaries who tried to seize the city gate and escape. Just when Stade thought the situation was settled, something went wrong in the privileged area. It turned out that many civilians in the privileged area were instigated by a certain high-ranking official of the Republic and clashed with the army that blocked the street. Stade quickly led his troops over, and saw a group of Florentine citizens holding kitchen knives and sticks, shouting slogans such as, "For the Republic," and "Fight them," confronting the soldiers who blocked the street. Before Stade arrived, the soldiers guarding the street had already repelled a wave of citizens' attacks. At this time, a voice suddenly shouted behind the citizens, "Citizens, we established the Republic for freedom and democracy. Now, the evil papal army wants to take away our power and turn us into slaves again. Are you willing to do this? No. No. We want freedom." In the streets, those passionate citizens who were instigated raised kitchen knives and wooden sticks and shouted. At this time, the sky was already dawn, and Stade felt that the person who instigated the people to resist must be a big fish. So, he asked the Italian translator provided by the Medici family, "Who is the guy who incited the people? Can you recognize him?" The Medici translator with a middle-parted hair listened attentively for a while and said, "It seems to be Secretary of State Machiavelli." "Who?" Machiavelli, Secretary of State, head of the Second State Office, responsible for diplomacy and military affairs. Damn, I almost forgot the big thing. Stade patted his head and suddenly remembered that Marin asked him to tie a man named Machiavelli in Florence back to East Frisia. Moreover, the requirement was that Machiavelli was intact. At the same time, Marin asked that this man and his family must be treated well. Obviously, his boss Marin took a fancy to this man named Machiavelli. Just like when Con followed Marin and brought back an old Italian man named Leonardo da Vinci. Now, the old man is very favored. Thinking of this, Stade said loudly, "All soldiers, listen to the order, find the guy who spoke, but don't hurt him." Yes. The soldiers shouted together, instantly suppressing the momentum of the rebellious citizens. Then, thousands of soldiers attacked the group of rebellious citizens. However, the purpose was to disperse the other side, not to kill. When the regular army got serious, those citizens holding kitchen knives and sticks were obviously not opponents. So, the citizen team was quickly dispersed. However, when the soldiers dispersed the citizen resistance team, they did not see the man named Machiavelli. "It's okay, let's go to his house to look for him." At this time, the guide party stood up again and expressed his willingness to lead the army to Machiavelli's house to take him away. Machiavelli did run back home. Before, he encouraged the citizens to resist, which was actually a last-ditch effort. However, he saw that the fighting power of the opposite army was too strong. Moreover, from their conversation, it can be heard that the other party used German. Because he had served as a diplomat of the Republic of Florence for several years, he not only understood German, but also spoke it. Obviously, it was a group of German mercenaries, which was not something that the citizens of Florence could resist. So when Stade ordered the attack, he ran back home secretly. However, just as he told his family to pack up their belongings and planned to change out of their noble clothes and disguise themselves as civilians to blend in with the civilians, Stade had already surrounded Machiavelli's home under the guidance of the Medici guide party. Machiavelli's home was obviously not a fortress. The soldiers roughly smashed the door with a large stone, and then surrounded Stade and broke in. The two bodyguards arranged by the Florentine government for Machiavelli were so scared that they dared not resist at all and surrendered obediently. Then, Stade saw Machiavelli, who was carrying his luggage with his parents and wife and preparing to go out. At this time, Machiavelli had changed out of his noble clothes and dressed like a civilian. Obviously, this guy wanted to blend into the civilian area first. Stade called the translator with a middle-parted hair, pointed at Machiavelli and asked, "Is it him?" The translator with a middle-parted hair looked at him and nodded, "Yes, it's him." Stade nodded with satisfaction, and suddenly remembered the famous plot that Con had told him about, knocking out Da Vinci and taking him away. So he turned around and ordered his guards, "Knock this guy out and take him away." Huh. The guards looked at each other. They also knew about the plot of Con knocking out Da Vinci and taking him away. However, they were not familiar with the business of knocking people out. "Execute the order." "Yes." The guards gritted their teeth and came to Machiavelli, who was terrified, and held him down. Then, according to Con's legend, Guard A hit Machiavelli on the back of his neck with a knife. Ouch! Machiavelli did not faint, but screamed in pain. "Why not?" "Second brother, you come." Then, the guy called second brother made another slash with his hand. Machiavelli cried out in pain again, but did not faint. "TSK. You bunch of losers, is it so hard to knock someone out? I saw Con do it so easily." Machiavelli also understood German. It turned out that these guys hit themselves on the back of the neck in order to make themselves faint. Could it be that the other party had a habit of knocking people out and taking them away? When the third guard stretched out his evil hand, Machiavelli, who was frightened by the beating and did not believe in the professional level of these guards, hurriedly said in German, "Stop beating, I will faint." Then, Machiavelli screamed inexplicably, tilted his head, and seemed to have fainted. Several guards were stunned. "Slap, we haven't done anything yet, why did this guy faint?" "But never mind, tie him up first." It seems that this is the process that Lord Con used to deal with Lord da Vinci. After tying up Machiavelli, who pretended to faint, a guard asked, "What about this guy's family?" Before Stade could speak, Machiavelli woke up from his pretended fainting and begged in not very fluent German, "Don't hurt my family, especially my wife." Obviously, Machiavelli was afraid that these big-headed soldiers in front of him would do something to his young and beautiful wife. After all, the military discipline of mercenaries is generally poor nowadays. "Don't worry, I won't treat your family badly," Stade promised. Stade was sure that this guy would become his colleague in the future, so how could he bully his family? "Then I'm relieved." Then, Machiavelli fainted again, as if he had not spoken just now. That performance, if not a Golden Horse Award or a Golden Image Award, it can at least win a Golden Donkey Award. Chapter 210, The French Army Flees. When Machiavelli was captured, other high-ranking officials of the Republic of Florence were also captured by Stade's men. Of course, their fate was not very good. Before, Marin and the Pope had discussed that Machiavelli belonged to him, and other high-ranking officials of the Republic would be handed over to the Papal State for trial. Some big bosses might be sentenced. After completing the control of the city of Florence, Stade was not in a hurry to control other areas of the Republic of Florence. Because the current Republic of Florence has not yet annexed the Republic of Pisa or the Republic of Siena. The Republic of Lucca does not belong to the Republic of Florence either. Therefore, the current Republic of Florence is not equal to the later Grand Duchy of Tuscany or the Tuscany region. The Tuscany region has an area of 23,000 square kilometers. Without the above three countries, the Republic of Florence is actually only about 16,000 square kilometers. However, among the current Italian states, it is also considered a big country. In particular, Florence is still a city with very developed industry and commerce. But because several other large cities have not been taken, the current Florence actually only has one large main city, the city of Florence. The other small towns were not worth mentioning. Therefore, Stade was not in a hurry to seize the other towns. As for the neighboring countries, who dared to come and grab the territory, he was worried that he could not find an excuse to deal with them. In addition, the reason why Stade was not in a hurry to take over other areas was because he was afraid that the French army would make trouble when they retreated. The fleeing soldiers were very scary, and the French army was about to be defeated. Once they fled, they would definitely pass through Florence. The Duchy of Milan had cut off the supply of the French army. The French army must be very hungry at this time. Without knowing it, the fleeing soldiers of the French army were likely to pass through Florence and ask for military rations from the Republic of Florence, which was close to France. Therefore, Stade needed to guard against the French army raiding Florence if they failed to ask for them. Therefore, he arranged the action to control other areas of Florence after the French army passed through. As for the villages outside Florence that might be looted by the French army, Stade did not want to care. Why? Stade was not afraid of not being able to beat the fleeing soldiers of the French army, but was afraid of helping Marin to provoke the King of France. Although Stade's capture of Florence in the name of the Papal States made the French unhappy, they were just unhappy. But if troops were sent to intercept the fleeing French troops, the nature of the situation would change. At that time, the Papal States and Marin would become mortal enemies of King Louis XII of France. Therefore, neither Julius II nor Marin wanted to confront the French army head-on. Moreover, the Republic of Florence did not belong to Marin, and Marin would not feel bad if the peasants here were harmed. As for the Papal States, although they would feel distressed, they dared not speak out. Who the hell let France have the strength to dominate Europe? The Papal States could not afford to provoke it. You know, the French have a very bad precedent. In the 14th century, the French abducted the Pope to Avignon in France and re-established the Holy See. The Holy See in Avignon was clearly a puppet of the French. Therefore, even as the Pope, he was afraid that the French would repeat the same trick and take the Pope to France. Stade's wait was not too long. Not long after he captured Florence, the Spanish army also broke through the city of Naples. The Spaniards themselves also had dozens of artillery pieces, but they were all 2 or 3 pound rear-loading bronze cannons, which were not very powerful and difficult to break open the city gates. However, these small cannons, combined with the 10 heavy cannons provided by Marin, were somewhat effective. Because of the small number of heavy artillery pieces, Gonzalo's army bombarded for 4 or 5 days before blasting a hole in the south gate of Naples. But Gonzalo did not rush to blow up the city gate, but waited for a few days. Because he received news that the French were out of food. At this time, the number of French troops in Naples was greater than that of the Spanish. If they rashly attacked the city and fought street battles with the French, the Spaniards might not have the upper hand. Therefore, after learning that the French were out of food, Gonzalo deliberately waited for a few days. After seeing that the French soldiers on the city wall were somewhat exhausted, Gonzalo understood that the opportunity had come. Taking advantage of the opportunity when the French were too hungry to be strong, Gonzalo asked the blaster to use 2 gunpowder barrels to blow up the south gate of Naples. Then, the Spanish sword and shield soldiers took the lead and rushed into the city of Naples. The Spanish army has always been equipped with sword and shield soldiers. Although Gonzalo learned the phalanx from Marin and generally used spears and matchlock guns. However, he did not give up the sword and shield soldiers. No, when attacking the city, the role of sword and shield soldiers was revealed. Hundreds of sword and shield soldiers, holding large shields and single swords, rushed in from the damaged city gate first, and arranged a sword and shield formation on the inside of the city gate to prevent the French army from counterattacking. Then, the Spanish army behind them continued to pour in. The French army, which had been hungry for several days, fought back desperately, but the soldiers had no strength. Despite the crazy attack, the Spaniards still stood firm in the city. Afterwards, Gonzalo commanded the Spanish army to form a dense formation, advance steadily along the streets, and repel the French counterattacks many times. Seeing that the Spanish army was getting closer and closer to the palace and it was getting late, the French commander, Duke Louis Armagnac of Nemours, once again used the escape trick. Duke Armagnac asked more than 10,000 Italian mercenaries in the city to withstand the attack of the Spanish army. The Duke of Armagnac, with the remaining 6,000 French knights and 9,000 Swiss mercenaries, quietly escaped from the north gate at night. The Italian mercenaries did not know that the French had fled at first, and they confronted the Spanish army for a while. However, when the news of the French escape came, more than 10,000 Italian mercenaries quickly collapsed and surrendered to Gonzalo. However, because it was night, the Spanish army had not received night combat training. Therefore, after thinking again and again, Gonzalo gave up the plan to pursue overnight. After all, the city of Naples has been taken now, and the strategic goal has been initially achieved. The French army that left Naples, like a wild horse that had broken free from its reins, immediately began to act recklessly. In order to solve the problem of food shortage, all the villages along the way in Naples suffered. The French army didn't care whether the farmers in Naples would starve to death. Every time they passed a village, the French army would rob all the food, including the bacon, salted fish and other foods stored by the farmers. Even live chickens, live pigs, and even cattle and horses were caught by the French army and killed for meat. In short, anything that could be eaten was swept away, quite like the style of the devils entering the village. The next day, the Spanish army began to pursue. However, this French army was not easy to attack at the moment. The Spanish infantry could not catch up with the French army and fell behind. Although the Spanish light cavalry caught up, they did not dare to attack easily. Because, not to mention the powerful French knights, the spear formations of those Swiss mercenaries were not easy to mess with. Therefore, the Spanish army could only choose to hang behind the French army and look for opportunities. And the French army, although they were all elite, did not dare to stop and fight a decisive battle with the Spanish army. Because the Marin square used by the Spanish was too restraining for the French knights and was also very lethal to the Swiss spearmen. Therefore, the French army had no intention of staying and just fled all the way north. However, their escape was organized and disciplined. It was not a rout, but a retreat.